I'm Ben Stykuc, and today for Asian Movie Pulse I am going to be doing part one of a feature retrospective on the In the Line of Duty series of action movies that were released in Hong Kong from between 1985 to 1995, initially starting with Yes Madam and concluding with In the Line of Duty 7 Seawolves. Hong Kong cinema was going through a bit of a transition at this particular point in its action movies. The general sort of popular sort of series have been period martial arts films, action films, and now there was a slow move over to the urban action cinema. Jackie Chan's Police Story was actually going to be released sort of 2 weeks or so after the release of Yes Madam, so it's very much a time of transition and change going through that particular genre. This film itself, Yes Madam, when we look at it now, we consider it to be quite star-powered. You have Michelle Yeoh, Cynthia Rothrock in the lead roles, with Corey Yuen as the director. 35 years ago, when this film came out, these principal players were not as prominent in the industry. Corey Yuen had only really directed one movie prior to this, Ninja and the Dragon's Den, and Michelle Yeoh had only appeared in Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars in a cameo role directed by Sammo Hung, and Cynthia Rothrock, this was going to be her first actual feature. So there was a lot of risk going into this, which, given the commercial savvy Hong Kong cinema, is quite a surprise. Though, as we were to see with the production company that put this together, D&B Films, this was something that would not be unusual as they were to progress in the girls with guns genre until their sort of disbanding about half a decade later. Yes Madam opens with Michelle Yeoh's inspector rather uniquely handing a flasher in a sort of comic opening before instantly shifting into action as she prevents a bank robbery. The film then sort of sets her up as the sort of fairly sort of stern, competent policewoman, and we then gradually get to meet the rest of the team, who are your typical Hong Kong police on cinema that don't seem particularly competent, quite sexist, and just not very good at all, to be honest with you. We get Cynthia Rothrock's arrival as a police chief, police inspector, I should say, I'm promoting it here, Carrie Morris from Scotland Yard. Us with English accents will probably go, this doesn't seem very English, that's because she's American, but local audiences probably wouldn't be noticing that particular issue. She gets a good introduction at the airport, dealing with Eddie Mayer, who a frequent appearance around this particular time as a heavy, trying to sort of get out the country, only suddenly gets stopped. This leads to the initial meeting of our two inspectors, a very frosty relationship to start with, and Morris immediately puts the local police in their place with the realisation that she can actually speak Cantonese. Our bad guy for this one is the frequent bad guy for lots of movies, James Chen as Tin. He had initially started out his career alongside the likes of Bruce Lee in good guy roles, but by this particular time his appearance had sort of changed a bit and was now much more comfortable playing the bad guys. He kind of had a good look and that good fit for him. Padding out the cast at this particular point, we then get to see our sort of Three Stooges almost in Mang Hoi, John Chum and Choi Hark as aspirin, Strepsil and Panadol, respectively. One of these little things you get in Hong Kong cinema is some really odd names, and this is particularly one of those cases. They are some ne'er-do-wells, thieves, etc., who sort of come across some film that could implicate Tin and his bad guys. And so this is where our plot MacGuffin really sort of kicks in. Do they add anything to this particular movie? Not so much, but there's a reason they're there. We also get cameos from Sammo Hung and Richard Ng as well as their sort of mentors. And these guys were there to kind of sort of pad out the casting, some more familiar figures. But also, interestingly, to add a lot more comedy elements to this particular film, which would probably play well in the local audiences, but Western audiences might struggle. Humour doesn't always translate very well. This is a more slapstick, broad, traditional Hong Kong kind of comedy that you'll either love or you'll either hate. The culmination of this film is in an absolutely stunning final 10-minute reel where the two inspectors go to the bad guys' sort of mansion house, and we just get an absolute ass-kicking of the highest order going on. The stunts are exceptional. There is so much glass and broken furniture during this one. It's quite surprising when you watch it, when you realise that Police Story actually came after it during the release, because again the amount of glass that gets taken out here is just an overload. Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Rothrock really stand out. They have by this particular point they've really got a chemistry going, and their confrontations with the stuntmen getting flown off the sort of the stairs over the top of the roof, and it's just absolutely brilliant stuff. It looks painful. I imagine the stunt work was exactly that. We do get a rather curious moment that probably is only in Hong Kong, with then we've got Chung Fat and Dick Wei as the sort of supporting heavies going one-on-one, mano a mano, mano woman, no, not sure how we describe it, but the confrontation starts with them both sets of opponents throwing sexist comments at each other before going into the duel. And again, this will be a recurring theme that we will see across in the Line of Duty series, in that the women are, or the inspectors are, superior to the men in every single way. The film ends on a rather sort of bleak note, which I won't spoil, but is rather fitting. It does actually work in context of the story. This really sort of sets the template of what we're going to see over the coming sort of series of films, but also with this new Girls with Guns genre. The two policewomen, as I said, are exceptionally competent, but there's no love interests for them. If you've got a male lead usually in these, there's usually some sort of damsel in distress to be rescued or to be left to one side while the man heroically does his duty. None of that here. It is a curious thing that you will see across all of them, and it's something that's replicated in other sort of films in the genre too, and it is just something to sort of notice when we're seeing them. It smashed the box office, won nominations for obviously the choreography and performances and so forth, and really is a good introduction. Once it was released, there were changes made to the video releases in the West, etc., which cut out all the comedy. And my first introduction to Yes Madam were released on VHS under the title Police Assassins 2. And the initial opening sequences have been edited around. They wanted a bit more sort of a bang for your buck start. The flasher comedy not really being a good, appropriate opener. They wanted something a bit more jazzy when they were doing it. The sequences with Sammo Hung and Richard Ng are sort of edited out, and the comedy is reduced significantly. So what was seen in the West on these original cut versions was a much harder, solid action film. That's not to say that the original is bad by any means. It's just the comedy aspects are very much connected more to a Hong Kong audience. So it again is individual taste as to how you will sort of take that. A lot of the time when people say, oh, we want to see the uncut version, there was nothing new in the action that was missing. It was actually the comedy that had been taken out of it. It still plays up really well today. The action sequences are just fluid. They were exceptionally well shot. So well so indeed that if you watch Corey Ewan's So Close, his all-female version of The Killer with Shu Qi and Karen Mok, that some of those sequences are reused, to put it mildly, nothing on there, or just blatantly stolen again, sort of recycling his own work. We now get to Royal Warriors, the second film in the series. Michelle Yeoh obviously was now becoming a bit more of a bigger star, so kind of gets the lead role to herself this time. Though this movie actually starts to play to the sort of Japanese audience a bit more now. Japanese and Hong Kong relationships, not always the greatest, given obviously traditional history, but the Japanese market was always a very strong one for Hong Kong product. And so here we get an appearance from a rather youthful looking Hiroko Sanada, one of the absolute legends of Japanese action cinema. He plays Yamamoto, a sort of Japanese cop who is on a flight alongside Michelle Yeoh and Michael Wong in his first appearance in the series, playing Michael Wong. Keep an eye out for this particular recurring theme here. A terrorist sort of tries to sort of take down the plane, but these three, two of them plus Michael Wong's assistants, in a loose sense, manages to prevent this. That is the wrath of his sort of fellow buddies that are sort of fought through wars together, and we see in flashback they sort of swear an oath of loyalty together, having survived those battles, that they will always be there for each other. His death leads to them wanting to take revenge. This leads to tragedy for Yamamoto's family, and the subsequent knock-on effect with him trying to take revenge, whilst Michelle Yeoh's inspector is just trying to rein him in a little bit. This is not as good as Yes, Madam. That's not a bad criticism. It's still a very solid action movie. David Chung handles it quite well. It's much more than the standard potboiler that you would get to see during this particular time. It expands a little bit actually on some of the themes that we've already started to see in Yes, Madam. Michelle Yeoh's character, again, is the most competent of the police. Her subordinates are just a mixture of idiots, to put it mildly, not very good at what they do. But Michael Wong, in again one of his earlier roles here, is effectively playing the love interest, damsel in distress part. But watch this movie closely. Michelle Yeoh doesn't really take an interest in him. He's finding her flowers, trying to sort of get her to go out with him, and eventually they do, but that's to meet with the family. But she never really sort of gives the impression that she's actually serious about this relationship. The only point we really do is when he's at the top of the building about to be let go by the bad guy, that we actually get to see some emotion. But there's never any sequences with them together that really makes you think that there's actually a full relationship going on here. The action is different this time, whereas in the first one we had a whole lot of bad guys to get beaten up. Here it centres around the main sort of four terrorists who only sort of appear like one at a time during this particular sort of sequence of events. It leads into an action sequence at the end, which some critics have said has been a bit of ripped off a bit with Tango and Cash, with the use of the armoured vehicle, which Michelle Yeoh rides to the rescue of Yamamoto in. There is a bit less of the martial arts and it's like more the gunplay and stunt work in this one, and this is really where we start to see Michelle Yeoh start to really form that persona that would sort of carry on later in her career. So not as good as the first one, but still very much worth the time watching. And this is where Michelle Yeoh then exits the series, because she had got married to Dixon Poon, who was the sort of financial backer really of D&B Films, the production company that were making these movies and to make the next few as well. And tradition in Hong Kong cinema was that once you had got married, the female is supposed to then leave their career and sort of be the supportive housewife. Not something that I really would imagine a Michelle Yeoh character ever wanted to do on screen. So this is where she then retired for several years. Only when her marriage sadly fell apart did she make a comeback, and that comeback was to be in 1992's Police Story 3 with Jackie Chan. So, and then, as we've seen ever since, just gone from strength to strength. But that led to an obvious problem for D&B Films, because we had the success of these two previous components. Wanted to make another movie in this sort of loose series, and so how they're going to replace their main star. So they did what in true exploitation fashion did, created their own again, and hired another former ballet dancer, because that's where Michelle Yeoh had started life out as, and renamed her. And this is where we get the introduction of Cynthia Khan. Now, those paying close attention will go, Cynthia Rothrock? Where's Khan come from? It appears that the distributors of these first two films had thought Michelle Yeoh is not an easy name for some audiences to pronounce. So in other markets, she had been marketed as Michelle Khan. Hence now where we get Cynthia Khan taking the first name of one of the leads of Yes Madam and the surname of the latter. In some markets, I do believe that they even tried to pretend that Cynthia Khan was Michelle Yeoh's younger sister. Again, exploitation films and their backstories, always entertaining. So this film came out in 1988, and we had two directors, Brandy Ewan and Arthur Wong, one of the exceptional cinematographers of the time. And Cynthia Khan's character, Rachel Young, starts off, and again, like all these movies, trying to start off with a bit of an explosion. She is on duty with her sort of partner. They witness a bank robbery, and he doesn't want to get involved, but she does, chasing the bad guy down. Also taking an opportunity to slightly humiliate this car owner that was refusing to pay the parking ticket. In traditional Hong Kong movie style, what we see also when she's chasing the bad guy, she can't run, so therefore splits the skirt to sort of actually made to run faster. So you get the slight sexualization of the character, while also the practical pragmatics of her too. The plot kicks into gear with again another Japanese import coming over again to sort of help with the box office, and this time in Hiroshi Fujioka. And he is over to get revenge on the death of his partner after the sort of chasing after our main bad guys, played by Stuart Ong, who's playing Nakamura, and another soon to be quite prominent name in the girls with guns genre, Michiko Nishiwaki. After his partner's death, he resigns from the force and comes over to Hong Kong to sort of try and come after them. What we get again as this the plot moves forward is the competence of our female lead. We have her uncle, played by Paul Chun, as the sort of police chief in this particular movie, and he is trying to protect her. He doesn't want her to get injured or wounded or killed in the line of duty, so he's always trying to keep her back, but only to find that actually she's the most proficient member of the team. When Fujioka comes over, he tries to pass off as the chaperone, trying to keep out of danger, but that actually only leads to more risk happening. The film here has a slight political element, with Stuart Ong and Michiko Nishiwaki playing sort of terrorists, and Stuart Ong's character is clearly not well. His hair is falling out and he's coughing, and so there's an implication that obviously the work that he's done has now caused this. So whether it's a reaction to nuclear fallout, chemicals, whatever it might be. And these bad guys are similar to the Red Brigade, the Red Army, the Biden-Mannhof sort of political motivated terrorists that we saw in the 60s and 70s, and this particular part of the story had been ripped out of recent events that have actually been occurring around this time. In the support of these two is Dick Wei again. I don't think there's anybody that this guy didn't fight during the 1980s. He was the bad guy du jour. He is their fence and their sort of sidekick during the course of this. The action is not as fluid as to be expected. Cynthia Khan was still sort of learning her sort of work, as it were, and has obviously the balletic sort of skill set, but curiously not as the grace that Michelle Yeoh would have. Clearly a good screen fighter, but needs a little bit more polish, and so this would come as the films would progress. What it is, though, is quite a brutal sort of final half hour, particularly when Stuart Ong's character, who's been set alight, is in an escaped with the help of Dick Wei and Michiko Nishiwaki. He's hanging out the escape vehicle on that as the police chase after him, and then he gets chucked out, and then does not end well. The fight sequence before that against Fujioka is very brutal, less stylized in terms of martial action, more just two people who hate each other going at it, which makes a bit more gritty realism for what we're seeing. Like the first film, Yes Madam, we get cameos again from familiar comical actors, so pretty much the trope of the Lucky Stars seem to make appearances. Stanley Fong rocks up as a sort of security member at the airport, and when Fujioka and Cynthia Khan are having dinner, we run into Richard Ung and Eric Tsang. Do they add anything to this? No, but again, it's just adding something for the local elements, a bit more local flavouring. Also in the cast is Melvin Wong, this time playing Michael Wong. So this is now two times we have a Michael Wong character in the movie. Also played by Wong, just to keep it going. He shows an interest in Cynthia Khan's character, which is rebuffed, much to Sandra Ng's appearance as a policewoman's displeasure. But again, recurring theme of this series is there is a curious lack of interest in men by the female leads on that bit, so it's very much career orientated women. That's what we're finding. The conclusion to this then led to a fourth movie in the series. It had done reasonably well at the box office, so we're going to sort of continue with it. And this is where we get to probably the apex of this series. I said there were 7 movies, and the 4th one, and the last, what we're talking about in today's retrospective, was In the Line of Duty 4, aka In the Line of Duty Witness. And for those who remember these movies coming out originally in the VHS days, this is where there's a lot of confusion going around. In the Line of Duty 3, when it had come out, was released in the West as Force of the Dragon, and it had been kind of retconned so that now the series had a linear approach. So we had In the Line of Duty 3. So Yes Madam became the first In the Line of Duty, with Warriors In the Line of Duty 2. Though if you were in the West trying to keep up with all of this, they released under different titles. So Yes Madam was released as Police Assassins 2, and Warriors as the first Police Assassins. So chances are you probably end up buying the same movie twice over the course of that time, or going to a cinema and end up going, I'm pretty sure I've seen it. But In the Line of Duty 4 brings us kind of back to some similar parallels in terms of hindsight as we had with the original first film, Yes Madam, in that we had Yuen Wu-ping as the director, and again, most people now will remember him as the fight choreographer on The Matrix, in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and just so many classic films as a director or choreographer. But he, back in 1989, was also going through a bit of a transition. This was the guy, I remember, that had done Snake and the Eagle Shadow. He had been involved in Drunken Master. So all these classic movies there, but were all period action films. What we now have is his transition into the world of the urban action movie. And in the previous year, he had done Tiger Cage for D&B Films, which was one of the sort of relaunching aspects also of Donnie Yen's career. Again, back then he'd made a huge breakout in Drunken Tai Chi, but the switch to urban movies had also hampered him too. So we get, again, an element of risk being taken. This was not a surefire, guaranteed success, and it's something we see now in hindsight across the board when we look back at Hong Kong cinema around this time, and we look at the names and the directors and think, wow, that is a great cast. Back then it possibly might not have been. There would be a lot more danger undertaken when doing these. So that In the Line of Duty 4 also sees a few changes in terms of the structure. Cynthia Khan is still the nominal lead here, but this time the plot brings in Donnie Yen as Donnie Yan, and Michael Wong for the second time playing Michael Wong in an In the Line of Duty movie, and it's a third straight film with a character called Michael Wong in it. The plot starts with a central MacGuffin, and we get one of the Yuen brothers, Yuen Yat-chor, playing Look, who comes to the assistance of Cynthia Khan while she's on a sort of police stakeout duty, but not realising that she is actually a policewoman, and ends up getting some hold of some film that implicates some of the CIA. In a shootout, he loses it. It drops into the water, never to be seen again. But that sort of kicks into the sort of 1970s paranoia, big government kind of plot that starts to emerge. The action here is relentless. As we move from action sequence to action sequence, which actually does drive the narrative. We start with the action sequences, and they're filmed in Vancouver, representing Seattle, so we actually get a bit more international kind of feel to this feature. And Yuen Yat-chor in these opening sequences is able to kind of hold his own. Eddie Mayer crops up again as a heavy, and then the action transitions over to Hong Kong, where he is been sort of framed, as it were, for the killing of Donnie Yen's partner. Once we move to Hong Kong, it just goes up a notch even further. We have some terrific sequences. Cynthia Khan battling a bad guy on the top of an ambulance. It looks as dangerous as it probably was to film, but showing that sense of no fear, anything goes kind of attitude that we would get out of Hong Kong cinema during this time, which is what got it loads of fans. Donnie Yen has a sort of BMX battle, which again is an interesting transition from using the old period martial arts sort of styles to the modern one. The final sort of real sort of last sort of half hour gets some terrific confrontations. We get Cynthia Khan going up against a female Guilo, as the Western martial artists were known in this era, in a really well choreographed sequence in battling up and down stairs. On that, it's quite brutal, it's quite fierce, and exceptionally well shot and edited. But the piece de resistance is the finale, where we've got Cynthia Khan versus Steve Berwick, and she goes in a very sort of hard-hitting confrontation, but Michael Woods versus Donnie Yen. This may be one of the best martial arts sequences we get in the modern action movie genre, where they are filmed battling on the rooftop up against the backdrop of an airport with planes coming in and landing. It looks visually fantastic. Michael Woods against Donnie Yen would be a frequent thing that we would see during this particular time. They were frequent sparring partners. He was a buddy of Donnie Yen's that was brought on over. They'd previously fought in Tiger Cage. They were doing so again in Tiger Cage 2, all the way up to Cheetah on Fire. And finally, when Donnie Yen was making his way as director, Michael Woods came over to film a short role in Ballistic Kiss. This is probably their best confrontation. Michael Woods has a very physical look, at one point practically hulking up when he gets angry, and counterplays really well with the intensity that is Donnie Yen. It's a credit to Cynthia Khan that she is able to hold her own here. It's very clear that Donnie Yen is the superior martial artist. He has a flow that just comes across so well on screen. And with Yuen Wu-ping as his mentor and sort of started his career, it was kind of inevitable that he was going to shine. And also, looking back, bear in mind this is 1989, how young he looks, given obviously he has a career that's spanned sort of 4 decades now. But Cynthia Khan still doesn't look out of place, and this again helped by a fantastic choreographer director in Yuen Wu-ping and supported by the Yuen clan. The action sequences are the best of the series, but also the plot kicks in well. There's little things going on about the sort of Chinese versus America, the CIA using sort of drug money to fund other sort of subterfuge campaigns that we'd seen with the Iran-Contra affair. But we also get some development with Donnie Yen's character, going from a very sort of straight-laced, by-the-book investigator to something a bit more looser towards the conclusion. Cynthia Khan gets to be a bit more feminine, a bit more empathic, but again, still the superior policewoman, still the competent one amongst all others. So this is where we sort of wrap up today's retrospective, and at that point the highlight of the In the Line of Duty series. The Girls with Guns genre would continue, and the In the Line of Duty series really would be emblematic of its sort of rise and fall. So starting with Yes Madam, and then we gradually see introduction of, over the years, into films of Michiko Nishiwaki, but then also Moon Lee would transition from being a sort of Wallflower Rolls to an action star, Yukari Oshima, and Sybil Who, etc., and the like. Where we leave this today with In Line of Duty 4 Witness is probably the top part of this kind of genre, the highlight. In the second part of this retrospective, I'll be talking about In the Line of Duty 5 to 7, where the series possibly fades somewhat in terms of budget, in terms of interest, but it really reflects that particular sort of subgenre as well. Whilst these are never going to be anywhere near as good as In the Line of Duty 4, still tell us some interesting things about the genre, about Hong Kong cinema as a whole. So hopefully you'll join me for the second one, and have enjoyed today's retrospective on this series.